In a world constantly reacting, the one who responds with reason holds the power. The one who can name their feelings without being ruled by them. The one who sees through emotion, not away from it. This is emotional intelligence, and the Stoics, those ancient masters of clarity and courage, knew it well. Emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing your feelings, it's about refining your relationship with them. It's the ability to observe your anger without becoming it, to carry your sorrow without letting it carry you, to recognize the winds of emotion, yet remain anchored. The Stoics trained for this, not in comfort, but in hardship. Not in theory, but in the daily theater of life. They believed in governing the self before trying to govern the world. That is where our work begins too. This video is not a retreat from life, it is a preparation for it. Through 7 timeless disciplines, rooted in Stoic thought and forged in experience, you'll learn how to increase your emotional intelligence the Stoic way. No fakery, no detachment from reality, only the clarity that comes when you choose to rule your emotions instead of being ruled by them. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Recognize the first impulse. The Stoics taught that emotions do not control us without permission. The first flash of anger, fear, or desire, they called this the propathia, the pre-emotion. It's involuntary. What matters is what comes next. Do you chase the flame, or do you hold steady? Seneca wrote, "We are not harmed by the things themselves, but by the opinions we form about them." In other words, between stimulus and response lies a gap, and in that gap is your power. Emotional intelligence begins there, not with how you feel, but how you respond to the feeling. You must train yourself to catch the spark before it becomes fire. That moment before a reaction, the flicker of heat, the tightening in the chest, the surge of emotion, that's the moment to study. That is the window where self-awareness lives. It might only last a second, but within that second is a decision that shapes your future. When something triggers you, do not charge into it blindly. Don't let the current of the moment sweep you away. Pause, step back. Treat that moment as sacred. It is the point where your character is being carved. Do not let it pass without inspection. Ask yourself, what just happened? What thought came with this feeling? What did I assume in that instant? What story am I telling myself, and is that story even true? This is not indulgent introspection, it's preparation. Each time you pause and ask these questions, you reinforce a powerful habit. You begin replacing reaction with response, volatility with clarity. Most anger is not about what was done, but what we think it meant. It's often a reaction to imagined disrespect or a challenge to our ego's fragile architecture. Our pride interprets, exaggerates, and then ignites. Most fear is not about the actual threat, but about our perceived inability to face it. Fear plays with shadows. It multiplies what hasn't happened yet. Most envy is not about what others have, but about the parts of ourselves we've neglected, rejected, or buried. Emotions may arise automatically. They are echoes of memory, flashes of instinct, but their grip tightens through our interpretation. We reinforce them when we assume without inquiry, when we judge without pause. We amplify them when we ruminate without clarity. To increase emotional intelligence, become fluent in your own reactions. Learn the terrain of your emotional world like a cartographer mapping a wild, ancient land. Trace the winding rivers of your past experiences. Mark the cliffs of past wounds. Name your reactions in precise language, not vague generalizations. Instead of saying, "I'm upset," say, "I feel disrespected because I expected appreciation and didn't receive it." Specificity is power. Trace their origin like a careful investigator at a crime scene. Ask not just, "What do I feel?" but "Where did this begin?" Is this rooted in something I've never healed from? Is this a fear I inherited from someone else's behavior? Question them with sincere curiosity. No interrogation, no shame, just curiosity. Where did this come from? Have I felt this before? Is it rooted in truth or in habit? Often, the emotion itself is old. What's new is only the mask it wears today. Recognizing this is like discovering the strings behind a puppet show. You stop getting pulled. The first impulse may not be your fault. It may come uninvited, shaped by your past, your conditioning, your biology, or the 1,000 unnoticed events of your upbringing. It might rise without permission, like a sudden gust of wind through an open window. But what follows? That is your territory. That belongs to you. The second thought, the second action, the words you choose next, the tone in your voice, the way you stand, breathe, respond. These are your brushstrokes on the canvas of character. This is where the real work begins. You can follow the path of least resistance and react as you always have, or you can carve a new groove, a new habit, a new discipline. This is the quiet battlefield where strength is forged. That is where philosophy becomes practice, not in the books, not in the lectures, but in the unglamorous moment between impulse and decision. That is the proving ground. That is the gym of the soul. That is where character is tested and revealed. That is where the Stoic lives, not in the first flash of emotion, but in what they do next. Not in the words they say when they're calm, but in how they act when provoked. Not in the silence of solitude, but in the noise of real life. That is where philosophy begins to live inside you. Not as abstract wisdom, but as a lived discipline. It begins in the heat of daily life, in the challenges that catch you off guard, in the tiny moments where you feel most tempted to react without thought. It is alive in the seconds you reclaim from reflex. It is alive in the pause you create between provocation and response. It is alive in the calm you build before the storm decides your fate. That's not detachment, that's command. That's not avoidance, that's ascendance. It is mastery of self, and it is the rarest kind of strength a person can possess. Start a reaction log. Each evening, write down one emotional moment from your day. What triggered it? What did you think? What did you feel? What did you do? Over time, patterns will emerge. You'll start catching your emotions earlier, responding with choice instead of reflex. Chapter 2. Separate emotion from identity. Too often we say, "I'm mad," as if anger is who we are. The Stoics taught a different way. You have anger, you are not anger. You feel jealousy, you are not jealousy. This distinction is critical. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He didn't say you won't feel things. He said you are not what you feel. Your identity lies in your reason, your virtue, your choices, not in the moods that visit you. Emotional intelligence requires this inner distance, a kind of healthy detachment that doesn't deaden the heart, but sharpens the mind. It is not a call to numbness, but a call to clarity, not disconnection, but discernment. The Stoic does not deny emotion, they give it structure. They acknowledge it without handing over the reins. It is not about becoming cold, but about becoming clear. You do not shut out your emotions. You listen to them, you learn from them, but you do not let them lead you into self-betrayal. You create space to see without being swept away. You become a calm center within the storm, rooted and aware. You observe your emotions the way a sailor watches the sky, alert, informed, but not panicked. The dark clouds do not mean shipwreck, they mean preparation. You respect the signals, but you don't surrender to them. You take note of the rising storm without abandoning the helm. You remain the one steering the ship. This is what allows the Stoic to stay composed in chaos. to feel deeply without losing themselves in the flood, to be sad without being shattered, to feel joy without becoming careless, to grieve while staying grounded. Emotional intelligence means giving feelings their rightful place, no more, no less. It's knowing that emotion is part of the human experience, but it is not the compass. It is not the map. It is merely a signpost that points towards something deeper. It means you can welcome a powerful emotion into your awareness, examine it from every angle, and then decide what to do with it. You don't drown in it. You don't run from it either. You sit with it. You ask it questions. You listen, then you lead. You study it. You understand its message, its origin, and its limits. When your identity is rooted in reason, emotion becomes information, not a verdict. It becomes a signal, not a sentence. It becomes a visitor, not a ruler. A guest, not a tyrant. You may serve it tea, but you don't let it rearrange your house. And through this discipline, you remain your own master. Not because you feel less, but because you see more clearly. You feel deeply, but you act wisely. And that balance, that integration of heart and mind, is the essence of Stoic strength. When strong emotion rises, speak to it directly. This is anger visiting me. I am not this anger. I will decide how to proceed. Repeat this in your own words, out loud if necessary. Over time, it rewires the mind away from over-identification. Chapter 3. Ask what is within your power. Every emotional storm begins when we try to control what we cannot. Other people's words, their choices, the outcome of events we can't shape. The Stoics called this a confusion of control, and it is the breeding ground of unnecessary suffering. Epictetus reminded us, some things are up to us and some are not. Emotional intelligence means knowing which is which. It means recognizing that you cannot control how others treat you, only how you interpret it. You cannot control the outcome, but you can control your preparation. You cannot stop the storm, but you can adjust your sails. Every time you shift focus from what's outside your control to what's within it, you reclaim emotional power. You stop trying to change people and start changing your response. You stop arguing with reality and start aligning with it. That single shift, away from obsession with outcomes and toward mastery of action, can change your entire emotional landscape. Suddenly, anxiety loses its grip. Resentment begins to loosen. Powerlessness becomes purpose. When you take ownership of your choices, you move from reaction to response. You stop chasing fairness from the world and start cultivating integrity within yourself. You no longer demand that the world treat you a certain way in order to feel peace. You become the source of your own steadiness. You begin to see that peace was never theirs to give or take. It has always been something to be built from within, brick by brick, action by action. Every ounce of energy you once spent on outcomes now returns to you as presence, focus, and calm. That calm becomes your armor. That presence becomes your compass. You stop waiting for life to be fair and start becoming someone unshaken by its unfairness. The Stoic is not passive. They are precise. They are surgical with their energy because they understand how much is lost in emotional waste. They do not leak their strength into things they cannot fix. They do not offer their peace as sacrifice to every frustration that crosses their path. They preserve their vitality for the battles worth fighting, the ones within, the internal battles of impulse versus discipline, of fear versus virtue, of ego versus truth. These are the conflicts that refine the soul. They don't waste time on blame when they could invest in responsibility, because blame is loud but empty, while responsibility is quiet and transformative. They understand that emotional endurance isn't born from comfort, but from conscious effort. Endurance is forged in stillness, in patience, in the long, quiet hours when no one is watching. They don't pour effort into trying to manipulate circumstances or control people. They've accepted that control is not dominance, it's alignment. That energy is too valuable to be squandered on illusions of control. They guard it fiercely, like a fire that must be fed with focus. They reserve it for the territory that matters: their habits, their mindset, their discipline, their words, their tone, their integrity. These are the foundations of character. These are the places where their power is real. That's why they have more energy left for what they can influence. They act where their effort has meaning. They do not measure success by applause, but by alignment. They lead by example, knowing their steadiness speaks louder than any argument. Their composure teaches. Their restraint inspires. They invest in their sphere of influence and trust that over time it will shape the world around them more effectively than any attempt to dominate it ever could. Influence by force fades, but influence through integrity roots deeply. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. This is not retreat, it is strategy. This is not surrender, it is sovereignty. True emotional power is economy of effort. It is the wisdom to know what is worth your energy and the courage to withdraw from what is not. It's knowing how to hold your fire and when to light it. It's the art of keeping your center when the world wants to spin you out. It's the silent power of choosing restraint over noise, of choosing principle over reaction. And the Stoics mastered that art not by force, but by focus, not by controlling the world, but by commanding themselves. In the face of any emotional challenge, ask, what part of this is mine? Write your answers. Draw a line down a piece of paper. Left side, what you can't control. Right side, what you can. Focus only on the right side. Chapter 4. Choose the right interpretation. Facts don't cause emotion. Interpretation does. The Stoics knew this deeply. A delay is not automatically an insult. A disagreement is not automatically disrespect. A closed door does not mean rejection. A raised voice does not always mean threat. What matters is the meaning you assign, because that meaning shapes your emotion, your behavior, and ultimately, your peace. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." That sentence holds a quiet revolution. It invites you to stop blaming the world and start inspecting your lens. It doesn't ask you to stop feeling, it asks you to start seeing. Clearer, straight, without distortion. Here lies the core of emotional intelligence, the power to choose how you see. Most people assume they are responding to events, but they're actually responding to their narrative about those events. Emotional intelligence means slowing that process down. It means catching the story as it's being written and asking, is this helpful? Is this true? Is this fair? Your boss criticized your work. You can choose to see it as a personal attack or as feedback, even if poorly delivered. If it bruised your pride, ask yourself, is this about the content or about my attachment to being seen as perfect? Your partner withdrew during conflict. You can assume they don't care or consider the possibility that they need space to process before responding. That's not weakness, that's maturity. This doesn't mean ignoring real harm. The Stoic does not call poison medicine. They do not practice delusion in the name of calm. Stoicism is not about denying the reality of injury, offense, or betrayal. It's about confronting those moments with clarity rather than assumption. It means distinguishing between harm and interpretation, between what happened and what we projected onto it, between what is painful and what is imagined, between fact and fear, between signal and noise. Most suffering is not born from events, but from meaning layered on top of those events. The Stoic knows this. A cutting remark may sting, but whether it becomes a wound or a scar depends on how we frame it. If you believe every unreturned call is rejection, Every delay is disrespect. Every silence is judgment. You've turned neutral data into emotional firewood. You've made yourself flammable. The goal is not to turn every situation into something pleasant. Life is not always pleasant, and Stoicism is not a philosophy of comfort. The goal is to turn your perception into something accurate, something honest, something that sees what is rather than what emotion wants it to be, something strong, something unfogged by insecurity. The goal is not to manipulate reality, it's to face it with a sharpened lens. The Stoic does not wear rose-colored glasses, they wear clear ones. They do not bend reality to feel better, they align their perspective to face it better. They do not retreat into fantasy to escape pain. They study pain to understand its source. They do not pretend everything is okay. They learn how to be okay even when it isn't. That's power, that's courage. They seek to see what is, not what their fear imagines, not what their ego insists, not what their wounds whisper. They hold their judgments up to the light and inspect them like a sculptor shaping marble. Is this true? Or is this a reflex? Is this real? Or is it habit? Is this mine? Or did I inherit it? They know that most of our interpretations were formed long before we were conscious of them. A teacher's criticism may echo a parent's disapproval. A partner's silence may awaken old abandonment. So the Stoic doesn't just see, they investigate. They peel back layers. They know the story you tell yourself is often older than the moment you're living. When you control your interpretation, you begin to control your energy. You reclaim the fuel you were unknowingly burning. You no longer collapse every minor inconvenience into catastrophe. You no longer view every disagreement as a verdict on your worth. You no longer read every setback as sabotage. You stop bleeding emotional energy into misread meanings. You begin to move through life with the poise of someone who knows how to see, not just how to feel. You learn to feel the sting without inventing the poison. You learn to pause between what happened and what you decide it means. This is the quiet power the Stoics trained for, the ability to translate life through a disciplined lens, not distorted by fear, not fogged by ego, but clear, steady, and fair. A power that turns crisis into clarity, that turns insult into insight, that turns rejection into redirection. It is not the power to avoid storms, but to navigate them with precision. It is the discipline to choose the story that aligns with your principles, not the one that flatters your pain. This is not a denial of life's hardship. It is a commitment to face life with truth in one hand and reason in the other. When emotion rises, ask, what else could this mean? Then go deeper. Write 3 alternative interpretations, not random guesses, but thoughtful possibilities. Consider what someone with more patience would see. Consider what someone wiser than you might assume. Try stepping into the other person's perspective. What pressures might they be under? What values might they be trying to protect? This is not an exercise in self-deception. It is a discipline of mental flexibility. You are training yourself not to cling to the first draft of your story. You are giving yourself options, and options are a form of freedom. With each alternative interpretation, ask yourself, does this make me clearer or more chaotic? Does this sharpen my perception or cloud it with ego? Then choose the one that strengthens your clarity, not your outrage. Choose the version that empowers thoughtful action, not reactive retaliation. Choose the frame that makes you stronger, calmer, and more just, not the one that flatters your pride while poisoning your peace. Chapter 5. Delay the response, sharpen the result. The modern world rewards speed. The Stoic world rewarded depth. In our era, haste is often mistaken for decisiveness. The faster the reply, the stronger the signal of power. But this is a dangerous illusion. Haste has a way of parading as confidence, when in truth it often conceals fear. Fear of silence, fear of uncertainty, fear of appearing weak. When emotions rise, the impulse is to react fast, to defend, to lash out, to post, to withdraw. But speed rarely brings wisdom. Speed satisfies the ego, but often bypasses the soul. Quick reactions may soothe the surface, but they deepen the wound. They rarely lead to choices you respect in the light of day. Seneca urged, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Why? Because time breaks the spell. It dissolves illusion. Time strips emotion of its drama and brings clarity to what once felt overwhelming. Time gives form to what was shapeless and distance to what was consuming. What feels urgent now may seem trivial in an hour. What feels personal now may reveal itself as projection. The betrayal you felt might just be misunderstanding. The disrespect you sensed may have had nothing to do with you at all. Emotions that once demanded immediate action soften into questions. Delay is not weakness. It is wisdom applied in slow motion. It is strength with a steady hand. It is courage expressed not through resistance, but restraint. It turns emotion into reflection. It gives your mind time to catch up with your emotion. It allows space for reason to emerge from the shadow of impulse. It gives your values a chance to speak before your pride takes over, before your habits take the wheel, before the part of you you've outgrown seizes control of your present. To delay is not to avoid. It is not suppression or denial. It is not cowardice wearing a mask. It is not silence born from fear. It is silence filled with awareness. It is not the absence of reaction, but the cultivation of right action. It is the refusal to surrender your agency to the urgency of the moment. It is to create space, space to breathe, space to remember your values, space to reconnect with your reason, to recalibrate your aim, to review your options without haste, to compose your tone before your tongue does harm, to ask yourself, what do I want to build here? A bridge or a wall, a wound or a window, an echo of my worst self, or a reflection of my highest one? This is what makes emotional intelligence visible. It's not just how you feel, it's how you pause. Not how fast you fire back, but how deliberately you choose your aim. Not how loudly you speak, but how wisely you respond. In that pause, you sharpen the result. In that breath, you reclaim your strength. In that stillness, you draw a line between who you were and who you are becoming. In that gap, philosophy becomes lived, virtue becomes visible, and character becomes formed, not as theory, but as action under fire. The Stoic does not rush into reaction. They do not allow urgency to masquerade as clarity. They treat time like a shield, a sacred delay between impulse and action. They step back, assess the terrain, and then move with clarity, with virtue, with alignment. They know that what feels urgent is not always important, and what is important is rarely urgent. They resist the urge to match the chaos around them. They refuse to be baited by the noise. They do not confuse speed with strength. They do not confuse silence with surrender. They understand that stillness is not the absence of motion, but the presence of control. They know that lasting impact often comes from deliberate restraint, that the strongest words are the ones spoken with discipline, that the deepest cuts are made not by rage, but by truth wielded carefully. The arrow held longer on the bow flies straighter, and so it is with thought. The more carefully drawn, the more powerful the result. The more time you give your mind, the more your response will align with your values, not your wounds. That is the mark of the Stoic, not suppressed emotion, but sanctified expression. Before responding to a triggering situation, count to 10. Feel the seconds pass one by one, not as delay, but as discipline. Each second becomes a statement. I will not be mastered by the moment. Each count is a step away from reaction and a step toward response. Let those seconds be your fortress, your shield, your quiet act of defiance against impulse. Or breathe 5 deep, slow breaths, letting each inhale stretch awareness and each exhale release tension. Let your breath remind you that you are in control, not your fear, not your anger, not your ego, you. If possible, sleep on it, because a rested mind sees farther than a restless one. What felt like a fire may by morning reveal itself as smoke. Let distance dissolve distortion. Let silence clear the fog. Let time cool the burn of emotion and reveal what truly matters underneath it. Let stillness reintroduce you to reason. Train the pause like a muscle, because it is one. And like any muscle, it grows stronger through use and patience. Strengthen it with repetition. Flex it in low-stakes moments so it holds strong when the pressure mounts. Practice it not just in conflict, but in small decisions, in daily frustrations, in traffic, in silence, in all the places where speed usually wins. Use it before you send the email, before you speak the word, before you make the decision. Let it become part of your rhythm. Let it become your default. Not hesitation, but thoughtful delay. Not passivity, but patient power. The more you practice the pause, the more you discover its power, the space between reaction and response, where wisdom waits. That space is sacred. It is where character gathers itself before action. The pause is not weakness, it is readiness. It doesn't slow your life, it sharpens it. It doesn't stall your progress, it protects your purpose. It gives you the edge of awareness, the dignity of control, the strength of chosen restraint, the clarity of virtue in motion. It's how the Stoic prepares their words like arrows, so they fly not in haste, but with purpose, so they land not wildly, but precisely. That pause is where philosophy becomes flesh, where the ancient wisdom meets modern choice, and it changes everything. Chapter 6. Learn from the emotion, then let it go. Emotion is not the enemy. It is a messenger. It arrives to tell you something about your values, your boundaries, your fears, or your unmet needs. It is a signal, not a sentence. The Stoic does not dismiss emotion. They examine it like a doctor reads a diagnosis, not to dwell on the discomfort, but to understand the cause and begin the cure. They do not flinch from what arises within them. They study it, learn from it. Then, having extracted what is useful, they release it like breath. Seneca reminded us, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Adversity brings emotion. So do mistakes, heartbreaks, and conflicts. These experiences pull us into feeling, and it is through this vulnerability that the soul has a chance to grow. The key is not to suppress these feelings, but to make them useful, to harvest wisdom from discomfort, to treat pain not as a problem to hide, but as a teacher to heed. Ask, what is this emotion trying to teach me? Am I angry because I was disrespected, or because I fear I am not respected at all? Am I sad because of the event, or because of what I expected the event to mean? Am I afraid of the loss, or am I afraid of the emptiness that might follow it? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. They strip the emotion down to its message. They reveal the story behind the sting. Once the lesson is drawn, holding on to the emotion no longer serves you. The Stoic does not indulge in endless rumination. They do not keep pain alive by revisiting its echoes. They understand that turning an emotion over and over in your mind does not deepen wisdom. It distorts it. At a certain point, the emotion stops being informative and starts becoming corrosive. They say, "I have learned what I needed. Now I release the rest." And in that act of release, there is strength. This act of release is not forgetfulness. It is freedom. It is the space where reflection ends and action begins. It is a way of clearing the mind so it can return to purpose. It is the difference between carrying a scar and carrying a wound. A scar reminds you of what you've survived. A wound, left untreated, keeps you from moving forward. The Stoic does not walk into tomorrow still bleeding from yesterday. You don't need to feel forever to prove that you felt deeply. The depth of your experience is not measured by the duration of your suffering. The length of grief, anger, or sorrow does not validate its legitimacy. Pain that lingers is not always proof of love. It may be the residue of unprocessed expectation. Endurance of emotion is not a measure of depth. It is a measure of your willingness or refusal to let go. Holding on longer does not mean you loved harder or cared more or felt more sincerely. Sometimes it simply means you haven't yet given yourself permission to move forward. That is not strength. That is captivity. That is confusing torment for tribute. That is mistaking emotional imprisonment for devotion. That is the illusion that pain honors the past, when in truth it only steals the present. That is wearing your wounds like proof of character rather than invitations to healing. That is mistaking self-inflicted suffering for loyalty to what is gone, to what hurt, or to what never healed. Maturity is measured in the balance between feeling and freedom, between allowing yourself to be moved and refusing to be owned, between acknowledging that something mattered and no longer allowing it to dominate your days, between opening your heart and not letting it be held hostage, between being emotionally honest and emotionally responsible, between full presence in emotion and full awareness of its impermanence, between openness to experience and the discipline to let it go, between the tenderness of presence and the boldness of detachment. To feel is human. To feel and release is Stoic. The Stoic feels what must be felt, learns what must be learned, and then walks forward unburdened. Not because they are cold, but because they are clear. Not because they are indifferent, but because they are intentional. They do not suppress their emotions, but they do not submit to them either. They do not close the door to their feelings, but they do know when it's time to walk through it and not look back. They carry the lesson, not the weight. This is not emotional avoidance, it is emotional intelligence in action. Avoidance runs from emotion. Intelligence runs with it, briefly, then lets it rest. Avoidance pretends nothing matters. Intelligence knows what matters and chooses how to carry it. It is the art of tending to what arises without building a home in it. It is the skill of holding space for your emotions without handing over control. It is learning to be a guest in your grief, not a permanent resident. To allow the sorrow to pass through, but not settle in your bones. To give the storm permission to enter, but not tear down the walls of your self-respect. It is the strength to sit with emotion without letting it sit on your throne. To recognize that emotion is powerful, but it is not sovereign. That it is human, but it is not ultimate. It is the clarity to know that pain may visit, but it does not deserve ownership. Pain can inform you, but it does not have to define you. You can honor what you feel without submitting your entire identity to it. It is the capacity to give emotion its voice, but not your voice. To let it speak, but not to speak for you. To hear its message without repeating its story to everyone you meet. To listen to it without letting it lead. To understand its purpose without letting it decide your path. To consult it as you would a guest, politely, attentively, and then, when the conversation is done, to walk it to the door. To learn from it without letting it rewrite your character. To integrate the message without adopting the mood. To keep your compass even as the sky darkens. To bow to the truth of what it came to teach, and then, like a wise host, thank it for the message and let it leave when it's time. Not too soon, not too late, but precisely when your deeper self knows that the work is done. That is the Stoic art, to feel fully act justly, and carry on with both wisdom and peace. Not detached, not consumed, but clear-eyed, open-hearted, and anchored in virtue. Start a practice called Name, Learn, Release. When you notice strong emotion, do 3 things. 1. Name it clearly and specifically. Instead of just saying, "I'm upset," say, "I feel disappointment," or "I feel rejected," or "I feel envy." Naming emotion precisely is the first act of power. It turns an overwhelming feeling into something understandable, manageable, and defined. By naming it, you take a step back from it. You observe it rather than obey it. 2. Ask what it's teaching you. What value did this emotion point to? What expectation was violated? What does this reveal about what you care about, what you fear, or where you are growing? Let the emotion become a mirror, not a mask. Reflect deeply. Sometimes the lesson is immediate and sharp. Other times it is subtle and hidden beneath layers of reaction. Be patient. Ask, what did this emotion want to protect? What did it awaken in me that I've been ignoring? 3. Visualize letting it go. Not as an act of suppression, but as a conscious decision to stop carrying what no longer serves your growth. Imagine setting it down beside you like a heavy stone you've carried long enough. Feel the release in your body, in your chest, in your breath. Picture yourself walking forward with a lighter step and a clearer mind. See the space that opens when the burden falls away. If the emotion returns, revisit the process. Name it again, listen to its teaching, and release it once more. Repeat as often as needed until you feel lighter, until you feel present again, until you remember that while emotion may knock on your door, it is your choice whether to invite it to stay. Chapter 7. Let virtue rule the emotion. The Stoics didn't aim to be emotionless, they aimed to be virtuous. Their mission wasn't to eliminate emotion, but to elevate their relationship with it. They recognized that emotion, when properly understood, can be transformed into fuel for moral excellence. They asked, does this action align with courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance? These were not abstract ideals to them, they were daily disciplines. They used emotion not as an excuse, but as raw material, as clay to be shaped by reason. Emotional intelligence finds its highest form when your choices are led by principle, not passion. When your inner compass is not swayed by the winds of the moment, but steadied by the foundation of character. When you feel the storm rise inside you, but still choose the path of virtue. There, emotional mastery is born. You may feel like lashing out, but if justice leads, you'll speak calmly, not to avoid conflict, but to preserve dignity, yours and theirs. You may feel the sting of disrespect or the heat of insult rising fast, but if justice is your guide, you will speak truth without venom. You will correct without cruelty. You will remain rooted in fairness, even when you are shaken by offense. You may feel fear, but if courage leads, you'll act anyway, not in the absence of fear, but in spite of it. Fear may rattle the surface, but courage draws from the depths. You'll take the next step not because the fear has vanished, but because the mission is bigger than the emotion. That is what Stoic courage looks like, action not despite fear, but through it. You may feel greed, but if temperance leads, you'll hold back, not because you lack desire, but because you refuse to be ruled by it. You choose contentment over consumption, purpose over indulgence. You understand that the cost of excess is not just external, it's internal, and you may feel overwhelmed by responsibility, by pressure, by uncertainty. But if wisdom leads, you won't spiral. You will not flail in 10 directions. You will take only the next right step, steady, deliberate, grounded. You'll return to what matters. You'll trust that clarity comes not from frantic motion, but from focused action. Let virtue take the wheel. Let emotion be the passenger. Hear it, consult it, learn from it, But don't hand it the map. Do not let it touch the controls. Do not let it change your course. The Stoic drives not by instinct, but by value. They listen to emotion the way a wise general listens to a scout. Gather the information, evaluate the terrain, but act only in accordance with the greater strategy. Emotion can alert you to danger, to injustice, to need, but it cannot decide the mission. It can inform, but it must not dictate. Passion may flare, but it is principle that determines the direction. Temper runs hot, but virtue runs deep. And when in doubt, the Stoic returns to this inner compass, not the moment's mood, but the enduring ideal, not the temporary impulse, but the timeless standard, not the fleeting urge, but the tested truth. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to feel rightly, to feel deeply, but act wisely, to be in touch with what stirs within you without being ruled by it, to hold the emotion and still choose your action from a place of clarity, to act not out of impulse, but intention, to let your response be so rooted in virtue that even your enemies are forced to respect it, that even in conflict you remain anchored, that even in pressure you remain whole, that even when shaken you remain steady. The Stoic is not a machine. They are a master of self. And mastery does not mean suppression. It means direction. It means clarity. It means knowing how to use the flame without letting it consume you. It means feeling without drowning, choosing without flinching, and living without apology for the strength you have earned by disciplining the emotions that once ruled you. It is not detachment. It is control. Not coldness, but composure. It is fire with form, passion guided by principle, and the heart ruled by honor. When you face a difficult emotion, ask yourself with sincerity and stillness, what virtue is being called for here? Instead of letting the emotion dictate the next move, turn inward and consult your inner compass. Write down the answer: wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance. Don't rush this step. Let the question sit with you for a moment. Let it dig beneath the surface reaction. Then reflect. What would wisdom say to this moment? What would justice demand? What would courage do? What would temperance hold back? Put it in writing, not for formality, but for clarity. There is something powerful about seeing virtue in ink. It transforms a fleeting thought into a fixed direction. Now take the next step and write down what action that virtue would take. Be specific, be deliberate. Turn your emotion into a signal, your reflection into a compass, and your virtue into motion. Let that plan, not the emotional surge, guide your behavior. Let it anchor your words, shape your tone, and steady your decisions. Make this a habit, and emotion becomes not your master, but your messenger. Your feelings will still come, but they will not control. Your virtues will lead, and in their leadership, you will find strength, steadiness, and true emotional clarity. Emotional intelligence is not some modern invention. It is an ancient fire, older than philosophy textbooks, older than empires. It is a strength forged in the crucible of real life, of hardship, of uncertainty, of repeated trial. The Stoics kept this fire burning not through speeches, but through their daily actions, their quiet strength, their resilience in the face of suffering. They felt anger, but they did not act unjustly. They felt grief, but they did not collapse. They knew fear, but they did not run from virtue. They lived not to escape emotion, but to elevate it, to wield it with purpose, like a blade that defends, never one that wounds without cause. To increase emotional intelligence is not to escape emotion. It is to engage it with discipline, to greet it at the door, examine its message, and then choose a response rooted in virtue. It is to extract clarity from chaos, to remain centered when the world shakes, to see the wave of emotion rise inside you and not be carried away by it. It is the quiet strength of someone who feels fully but decides wisely.